And welcome to the Capacity Building Institute. I'm going to hand it over to Natushka, who's going to introduce you to the organization, and then we'll jump into our guest speaker in a moment. So Natushka, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kristina. Hi, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful day today. So my name is Natushka Michelle Flay. I am the Outreach Coordinator for CBI, Capacity Building Institute. Let me talk to you a little bit about CBI. With CBI, Capacity Building Institute, we provide training, coaching, mentorship support to the staff and volunteers in the environmental nonprofit sector across Canada. With nonprofit leaders, staff, and volunteers, most constantly balance the urgency and scales of the issues that they face with limited resources and training. So that's why we're aiming to foster leadership within the environmental sector by providing, like I said, training, coaching, mentorship at all stages, from executive director to board members, fundraisers, and other staff. What is our missions? We want to train 10,000 leaders of small shop nonprofit environmental organization in Canada within the 10 years. We believe that Canada Environmental deserves all the help it can get from well-run nonprofit organizations, from donors, from well-trained staff and board members. We believe that environmental nonprofits play a vital role in the ongoing efforts to ensure a healthy and sustainable future for all Canadians. That training matters because it helps keep our organization well-staffed, fully compliant with laws and regulation, and effective on their game-changing work. We also believe that small shop organization makes a big difference. They had diversity, dynamics, and grassroots involvement in Canada's environmental sector. And at last, we believe that there is much more to do. A stronger and more resilient environmental sector is within our reach if we have the courage and the commitment to build in together. What do we offer? To start with, Capacity Building Certificate Program, the CBCP, which started today, just before. And in that, with the CBCP, we have 6 models, which we started today. The first one, the Finances Management and Fund Development, which goes with our webinar today. We also offer internship training program, fundraising intensive workshop, capacity building webinar series like we're having every month, leadership training streams. We have wonderful trainers. To start, Sam, Rob, Barb, and Alex, who offers wonderful training through the courses and the webinars. Today's sponsors is Sustainable Eastern Ontario, CEO. Sustainable Eastern Ontario was founded in 2010 and officially incorporated in 2011. CEO is a network organization that fosters partnership and collaborations in sustainability activities through Eastern Ontario. Its programs and networks include National Capital Environmental Nonprofit Network, NCENN, Capacity Building Institute, CBI, Green Books for financials, the Apartment Sustainability Office. In June 25th, 2021, the NCENN has launched a Francophone site that covers over 30 organizations. And if you want more information, you could contact Jean-Cat Neptune, who is the ECHO Executive Director, and you have his email. You can also contact us, Anna, who's the operator manager, and me, Natushka Michelle Flay, who's the outreach coordinator. You could send us an email at infos@capacitybuilding.ca. You could visit our website at www.capacitybuilding.ca, or come or write us a letter at the address. You have to save that date. Don't forget, Monday, July 3rd at 4 p.m. Eastern will be our next webinar, which the title will be Governance and Board Development.
Thank you so much, Natushka. I really appreciate it. And I'll just clarify that the next webinar is actually on July 10th at 4 p.m. We just decided to move it a week because of the holiday. So save the date for July 10th, and we'll make sure that our website accurately reflects that if it doesn't already. So thank you so much, everybody. And a special welcome today to all of the participants of the Capacity Building Certificate Program. As mentioned by Natushka, this is our 6-month boot camp for how to run a small shop environmental organization in Canada. We just launched the event today. And if there's any last minute takers who really want in on this program, please speak to Hannah. We may be able to squeeze you in, but we had our first session today, and this is part of the Capacity Building Certificate Program, where we have a guest speaker come in to talk about the theme of our month, which is on fund development, the funding cycle, how to improving fundraising. But we also wanted to open this up to the broader community that we work with as part of our monthly sessions. So you'll notice over the next 6 months that the themes of our monthly webinar from 4 to 5 p.m. match the themes of our capacity building program. And that's on purpose so that we can have all of the CBCP participants take part in these sessions in addition to the community at large that attends these sessions. So great to see all those names from across the country. Welcome today to the webinar. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our guest speaker today. Our guest is going to be Krystyn Tully, and you've all seen her bio, and I'll let her introduce herself briefly, but I just want to quickly say that Krystyn has come highly recommended by several people who've worked with her in the community, and just she brings a really incredible spirit to the work of environmental organizations, really tangible and tactical ways for us to improve our organizations. I'm personally working with her right now on a scaling strategy for the Capacity Building Institute, and I've had several other folks who've worked with her on different projects with her consulting firm, Entremission. So I just want to welcome you, Krystyn, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say today. So I'm going to pass it over to you.
Hello, thank you, Kristina. That's a really a generous introduction. I appreciate that. For those who don't know me, I have been working in the Canadian environmental sector for more than 20 years now. My experience is primarily in water, freshwater, as well as more recently ocean issues, ocean awareness. My experience ranges from the spending money side of things to doing the program work, designing programs, as well as the fundraising side, individual donations, government partnerships, foundation grants. So the perspective that I bring to this conversation is somebody who did not have an educational training or background originally in nonprofit organizations. When I first got into the nonprofit sector, I very much came from the perspective of somebody who was passionate about the issues. And then the learning that I did was on the job or through workshops and training or part-time studies that I did after I got into environment and nonprofit work. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of a mix of theory as well as practical experience, some lessons learned in the session that we have today, give you a framework that will either help you think about how to approach this monolith that is fundraising and fund development if you're new to it, figure out how to get started, or if it's something you've been doing for a while and you feel a little bit stuck, or you feel like you need to be doing better, but you aren't sure where to focus. It will also give you an idea of how to evaluate your current work and where you could spend your time or prioritize your time in order to generate more impact for the work that you're doing. I will apologize in advance that I'm taking very long to recover from a cold, so my voice might waver in and out. Don't be alarmed. I am going to switch over to screen sharing as well and just give you an overview of what the framework looks like.
I'll turn my video off while you share your screen, Krystyn, and I'll let others know that if they have Q&A throughout the presentation, please enter it in the Q&A section below, and we will come back to the questions at the end of the presentation. So please be sure to be noting down your questions and start thinking of them now. So thanks, and we'll see you back here after the presentation.
So the fundraising cycle that is kind of the framework for what we're talking about today is a 7-step cycle. It starts with building a prospect list. It ends with either spending the money that you've received or going back to square one and soliciting new funds. If you're starting an organization or a project from scratch and you don't have a history of fundraising, you're going to start with step 1. If you've been around for a while, you're probably doing work that intersects with each of these steps. As an organization evolves and its relationships evolve and its funding relationships develop, you typically find yourself splitting your time between different stages of this process. So it's going to sound all very neat and orderly when we talk about it today. But the reality is a little bit more fluid in terms of your day-to-day experience. So just in terms of an overview of the cycle, I'm using some salesy terms, but if you're thinking about prospects, you're thinking about funders, you might call them grant makers, you might call them donors, you might call them members. Essentially, a prospect is any person or organization who has the potential to support your work financially. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't, but a prospect is the theoretical group of people who could be supporting your organization. Once you have a sense of who might be supporting your organization, and that could involve research or it could involve just listing a group of people you know who like the work that you do, the next step is called qualifying. And qualifying is when you take a look at this big long list of people or organizations who might support your work, and you start figuring out who are the best prospects or candidates for supporting your work. So a qualified prospect is someone who not only theoretically could support you, but someone who actually is quite likely to be interested in the work that you're doing or the cause that your organization's involved with. And the next phase of that relationship is building trust. This could be getting to know a funder individually, building trust with them on a personal level. It could involve getting awareness for your issue out into the world. So if an organization is going to fund your work or support your work, they need to believe that the work that you're doing is important. So if you're working on a cause that maybe has less profile or is less known, in order to build trust with funders, you might need to spend some time developing their understanding of the importance or the urgency of the issue, and it might have less to do with your organization directly. Once you've got that established connection to a potential funder, you need to ask for money. So this is something that is very much pulled from the sales experience, the use of the word, the ask, but it is a very important part of this process to directly ask funders or potential funders to support the work that you're doing. Because you need to get to step 5, which is the close. That's closing a deal. Maybe you get a yes, maybe you get a no. But the worst thing in the world is to never get any answer at all, because you aren't quite clear what your next step should be if you're just hearing crickets from your potential funders. So you really want to get to that close. You get a yes, you get a no. If you get a no, you go back to your prospect list and the whole cycle begins all over again. If you get a yes, then you move into actually stewarding the donation. That means spending the funds, reporting back to the funder, letting them know how things went, making sure that they understand the impact of the work that they've done. And most of the time that's in preparation for another ask. So steps 5, 6, 7 are a shortcut to step 4, where you're asking for a renewed support or renewed relationship with a potential funder. As you move through this cycle, we call it the leaky budget or leaky bucket. You're going to start with a bunch of people in a prospect list. Maybe you've got 100 people on your prospect list. By the time you actually get to that close, far fewer people will actually be left in this system. You might only get a final decision from maybe 10 funders that you've established a relationship with and put in an ask. So you're assuming that as you move from steps 1 to 7 or steps 1 to 5, the number of funders and potential funders you're interacting with is going to get smaller and smaller at each step along the way. So this is the overall framework. This is a really great framework when you're dealing with fundraising asks that are going to go to a category of people. Like you want to raise foundation grant money, and you might approach 5 different grant makers. You might approach 10 different grant makers, but a group of grant makers. Same with approaching corporate sponsors, corporate donors, maybe event sales where you're trying to sell groups bulk tickets to events, tables, things like that. You're trying to solicit contributions to an auction or some other kind of in-kind ask. It's a framework that you can use when you know who you're going to be asking for money from. And when you've got a specific ask, a grant proposal or a corporate sponsorship pitch, you're going to be putting an ask out into the world. It's not as helpful a framework if you're doing something like a very general direct marketing campaign via snail mail, or an advertising campaign where you're just kind of putting a general statement out into the world, but you aren't 100% sure who's going to see it or who's going to respond on the other side. You would use a different strategy to nurture those relationships and to develop those asks. So step one, when you're building your prospect list, this is really creating a list of who those prospective donors are going to be. Sometimes you know in advance. We are doing a corporate sponsorship campaign, and so we want to develop a list of potential sponsors who would be interested in supporting this work. Sometimes you're working from the other perspective. You know that you need to raise, say, $50,000 to support a program, but you don't actually know where those funds are going to come from. That's when you might spend a bit of time on prospecting to figure out where's our greatest potential. Is it going to be from foundation grants? Is it going to be from corporate sponsors? Is it going to be from individual donors? So you either know who you're targeting from the outset, or you spend your time figuring out what types of funders are most likely to support the specific project or initiative that you're raising funds for. Qualifying step is what comes next. If you did, for example, subscribe to one of the foundation grant databases and you ran a search for every environmental funder in the country, you might get a hit of 500 possible foundation grant makers across the country. There is no need to qualify all of them. You could get stuck in qualifying for the next year. And the goal really from a practical point of view is to get to the fundraising stage as quickly as possible in a way that will generate the best results possible. So the qualifying of your prospects, the amount of time that you spend on this stage is going to depend on how qualified and how promising those prospects are. If you found 3 grant makers or 3 sponsors that seemed like an absolute perfect match for your organization or its work immediately, then let's move to the next stage in the cycle and start establishing those relationships and getting to the ask. There's no need to go through this in sort of an academically rigorous process. So this is where your fundraising process is going to start to split off into streams. Some people are going to stay on the prospect list and you're not going to get to qualifying them. Some of them are going to qualify and be amazing, and you're going to move right ahead to the next stage. When you're looking for prospects who are good candidates, you're looking for things like, are your interests aligned? Do they tend to give the amounts of money that match the amount of money that you need? Do they tend to support organizations or projects like yours? And what's their decision-making time frame? If you need money for an event that's happening this summer, but they only give out grants every December or make sponsorship decisions in December, even if there's a great fit in terms of interests, they may not be a great candidate because the timelines for your 2 organizations don't match this year. Building trust is the next phase, and this could last anywhere from 5 minutes to 5 years, really depending on the scope of the potential relationship, the level of trust that's required for them to make a decision, how unique or special you think the relationship or the ask is going to be. In some instances, the building trust stage is simply the foundation grant that you submit, and it's establishing according to the criteria that your organization and its approach are trustworthy and credible and reliable ways to achieve the shared goals of the foundation and your organization. Sometimes it's getting to know an individual at an organization or at a sponsorship company or an individual, and actually nurturing a one-on-one sense of trust. Getting to know the funders and their priorities is an important part of this. It's not just about you broadcasting to the funding community, saying what you do, talking about yourself. It's getting to understand them and their priorities. You will find that what a funder is looking for in real life doesn't always perfectly match what their interests are on paper. And it may also be that the way that you've interpreted information that you saw on paper is different from how they're interpreting it internally. So just getting as much information as you can about the funder and their thought process and their priorities will help you prepare for step 4, which is the real core step of fundraising, which is actually asking for support. So the ask is when you say to a funder, will you support this organization, this program, this initiative? Will you support it in this range or for this specific amount of money? Can we please get a decision, yes or no? That could be through a formal process like an open grant call, where a lot of organizations are invited to submit a proposal at the same time. It could happen in a personal conversation over lunch or over coffee with an individual donor or a corporate sponsor, if they have the ability to make decisions or they like to make decisions in a more informal or a one-on-one process. You should get a sense of what their decision-making process looks like during that trust building stage. So rarely are you going into the ask completely blind. At this point, you typically understand enough about them to know when they're going to make decisions, how much money they're thinking about giving to your cause or individual projects, and what they need to hear in order to understand the match between their priorities and your priorities. So in that trust building stage, you might better understand things like, how do they measure success for the money that they give? What type of impact are they looking to generate? Do they need stories that they can tell their customers or their clients? Are they looking for hard data to support the impact? Are they looking for policy wins? Are they looking for public reach? The trust building stage gives you insight into how to frame an ask that as best as possible shows the alignment between the work you're doing and the funder's interests. The close is the part where they say yes or no. So as I said before, sometimes it doesn't feel great to hear no, but no answer at all is leaves you in the worst position. So a close can be, sorry, we can't help this year. It could be, sorry, we can't help with this particular project, or the funding, the amount of money requested doesn't fit with our ability to give right now. A yes can look like, we're going to give you exactly what you asked for. Here's a check. A yes can look like, we want to support this, but we need to negotiate an agreement. We're going to give you X dollars over X period of time. Your organization has to provide Y sponsorship value or Y sponsorship benefits in exchange for that. So there might be some negotiation. For a larger grant or a larger sponsorship, there's usually some kind of written agreement that spells out what the funder is giving money to support and what the organization is doing or offering in exchange for that funding. So the close process, if you haven't been through that before, can take longer than people are anticipating. So it can be anywhere from 0 minutes because the check is in the mail to a couple of months of back and forth. And then requiring maybe lawyer's review or sign off from a board on both sides, some kind of oversight or governance review. So that close process is important to keep in your timeline so that you've got the support that you need and the capacity that you need to finalize the deal and actually get the funds and get on with the good and exciting work. So if you get the funding or some of the funding that you've requested, that relationship is going to move into the stewardship phase. This depends on how long the project is that you're working on. A year is a very common period of time, but it could be more, it could be less. So stewardship is when you're spending the money. One thing that you don't want to do, but it can happen because we're also strapped for time and resources, is you don't want to take the money and just spend it and not talk to the funder again for the rest of the year. Sometimes, on occasion, it's what they like. They don't want to be involved in the day-to-day. They're just happy to help out. But oftentimes funders do want to know what's happening. So you want to keep them in the loop in terms of the good news about work that's being done or impact that's being generated, testimonials that might come from members of the community or participants in the program. You want to share impact numbers or metrics just to help the funders see the relationship between the funds that they've given and the impact that it's happening in the world. And also so that they get excited about it, because if a funder can spread the word about an incredible program or incredible impact that you're having, they can do some of that relationship building for you. They can help you identify new prospective funders, make the ecosystem of support for your program even larger, because they become committed and excited about the success of your program. And the last step in the process is the official reporting step. Usually funders will require some kind of report. It could be a series of metrics like a numerical report, X number of trees planted, or X tons of CO2 emissions contained. Sometimes it's going to be more emotional and more storytelling based. They want an article that they can post on their website or a video that shows the impact of the work that was being done in the community. always think about what you might want to do next with a funder when you think about your reporting. The reporting stage is really the most powerful phase that you have for setting up your next ask. If it's appropriate to go back to the funder and ask for money again, at this point, if the program has gone well, they should be so excited about the work that's being done that they want to stay involved or want to continue to have an impact. Or if there were lessons learned, things don't have to go perfectly. If you learn something really important that needs to be incorporated into the next phase of this project, a renewed grant can be based on problems, issues, struggles. It doesn't have to be based on perfection. So there's no need to pretend with funders that everything worked perfectly, thinking that that's the only way to get funding. Sometimes showing that you hit a wall or that you experienced a challenge becomes the most compelling reason to fund a program again for a second time. So an example of thinking about that ask would be if you did a public awareness campaign, for example, June 8th is World Ocean Day. In Canada, there's a full week of events happening, which is Ocean Week Canada. It is now in its second year. If this year goes incredibly well and twice as many people participate as last year, it may make sense to go back to the funder and say, there's a huge amount of public momentum. We want to do this again. However, for capacity reasons, in order to see this program or this initiative scale to the next level, we need to create this new staff position, or we need these additional dollars for advertising. Show them the impact that the work created, but also show what the need is for what comes next. When it comes to environmental work, there's very little progress that actually gets made on a monthly basis or a weekly basis. If we're talking about protecting ecosystems, raising public awareness, broadening understanding of science, or adopting policy, these types of initiatives can take months or years in order to actually generate impact. So if you've got a solid theory of change or strategy for your program or initiative, you probably always have a sense of what the next priority is going to be. So show that to the funders and show them how you're building something that is leading somewhere, leading to the greater impact that the two organizations are trying to achieve. So you can do that through the reporting stage, which will then make a follow-up ask much easier. Meanwhile, you're going to go through steps 1 to 5 all over again. This is either because the original funder said no and you're trying to find new funders, or it's because that funder said yes, but you've got other needs for your organization. There are other projects or more funds that are needed in order to support a program. So while the stewardship with one funder is happening, you're going to be going through that qualifying, relationship building and asking process with other funders. So that's the neat, orderly process. But I did want to flag a couple of challenges just to be real about what the experience is like. Where is this going to be hard? So one area is in time. If you are not an enormous organization with a huge development staff and lots of specialized roles, you probably don't have enough time to actually qualify and build relationships with every potential funder in the country. You're probably also running communications, doing the program work, managing your staff, and trying to be a human being outside of work as well. So there is a limited amount of time that you have to do this. And the more successful your fundraising is, the more work you need to do. So that's something that can catch people off guard when you get into that first bout of success. Everything up to that point was, I can do this work when I raise this money. It's going to be so great when we raise this money. And then what actually happens is the maintaining of the relationships and the reporting to your existing funders takes additional work. So when you think about scaling and when you think about success, prepare for success to come with additional work, because that's the nature of relationships. You also can't control when funders make decisions. So that's a key sense of frustration where you might have time to work on a funding proposal this month, but if the funder is deciding that they want grants submitted right in the busiest time of year for you, you're working on their timeline and you're working on their schedule, and that can definitely be challenging. Finding funders, knowing people who to ask, if you're just starting out, if you don't have a lot of personal connections, that can be challenging. And you don't know what you don't know. So if you were, working on a climate change initiative 10 years ago, you might not have known that inside of government, there was going to be funding for these types of initiatives coming soon. So keeping a network as broad as you can and as tapped in as you can to different areas so that people will alert you to new opportunities when they arise is very helpful. The other challenge that people can stress about is knowing what is the right ask. So how much should we ask for? If you ask for too much, you might get nothing. And if you ask for too little, you might get some, be obligated to do the work, but then be struggling to have the capacity to actually implement the project properly. So that's a real pain point for people. And definitely having a good relationship with a funder, getting to know them, being able to just ask them outright, here's what we need to do. Here's what I'm afraid of. What do you suggest? If you've got that kind of direct relationship or intelligence coming from within your community, that can help you with that ask. So if you get stuck, I'm sure there's some people on the call that have experience with fundraising that are like, yeah, I know all this. I've been doing this for years. Or you're brand new and the flow seemed so easy and it's not coming together for you. This way of conceiving of your fundraising cycle is really helpful because it tells you where to spend your time and where to prioritize your efforts. And I always feel like if something seems overwhelming or intimidating, if I just know where to focus, I can block out all the other stuff, put my head down, do the work, and hopefully make something good happen. So if you don't know who to ask for money, then that means that you want to be in step one, building your prospect list. You want to figure out who you can ask. You don't know if it's going to work, especially if you're brand new at it, there's going to be some trial and error. But if you literally don't know who to ask for money, then absolutely focus on working on prospects. If you don't know who's likely to give you money, you're like, well, I could ask these people, I could ask this foundation, I could ask this sponsor, but you have no idea whether or not it's going to be a good fit, then you want to be looking at qualifying. Or if your list is so long that you don't know where to start, qualifying is where you want to spend your time. If you know who you want to ask, but you don't know how much to ask them for, you don't understand how their decision-making process works, you're not sure if they're interested in your in the work that you do at all, if they want to be affiliated with it, then that trust building stage is the stage that you need to be in. It's also a great place to spend time or effort if people aren't aware of your issue or if they're not aware of your organization. So trust building is probably it's probably the most important part of building a funder network, but it is one of the most challenging because a lot of that work falls under capacity or overhead. It's your communications team, it's your executive director, it's your outreach folks. Those are the people that do a lot of the trust building, not necessarily the fundraisers on your team. And then asking for support. So if you think, I know all these funders and I know what they're doing and I'm really tapped in, but we're just not getting any money, then you go to the question of, are you asking people for money? Are you actually saying, please support us, here's how much we're looking for? And are they saying yes or no? If you've got a bunch of asks out and people aren't getting back to you, then you know that following up with people, asking them to make a decision, that's the place where you need to focus on that close. And if you're getting a lot of no's, then that gives you information about that ask. There's a sign that either you're asking the wrong people or you're not asking in a way that's compelling to your fundraisers. So the close is a really, really important point in the cycle to actually get feedback from the world around you. Are we on the right track? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, and you're doing the work, just always remember to keep the funders in the loop. Make sure that they're part of the community, they're getting the impact data and the impact information so that you're setting up the next ask. And if the funders have said no, you're going back to the prospect list and you're starting all over again so that you're constantly floating relationships through this cycle. You've always got different funders at different stages in the cycle. And hopefully if you use those prompts, you can get yourself unstuck from whatever stage you're stuck in. From a budgeting point of view, the cycle can also help minimize surprises. So you shouldn't ideally be at the end of a year wondering if you're going to meet your fundraising target. It doesn't feel good early in the year to see danger signs or warning signs. It doesn't feel good to think, I don't know if we're going to make it this year. But at least if you know in advance, you have an opportunity to do something about it. You can go back to that stuck slide and figure out where you need to focus your attention and figure out how to make a difference before it's too late. So if you think about funding potential flowing through this cycle, if you need to raise $100,000 a year, then in your cycle of asking for support and closing, you should have $300,000 in asks out there. If your goal is to raise $100,000 a year and you're only talking to funders who have the potential to give $10,000, then you know right off the bat you're never going to reach that goal this year, and you need to change your behavior or you need to change your goal. Same if your qualified list only has 10 funders, they've got a maximum amount of ability to give at $100,000. You're going to lose some along the way because they're not making decisions or they say no. So by the time you get to the close, you're going to have far less money actually coming through the door. So you can take a look at the value of grant prospects at every stage of the process. And that will also give you a good indication of whether or not you're on track to meet your fundraising targets for the year. And if you are, great, what you need to do to make sure it happens. And if you're not, where you need to focus to increase the chances that you hit that budget or exceed that budget for the year. One plug, if you want more information like this, Entremission does a weekly newsletter called The Organizer. We rotate through a series of topics, including fundraising. So if this information is helpful to you, we put this out once a week and we welcome all subscriptions. It's free. So that's The Organizer at entremission.com. But I'll stop self-promoting there. And I want to talk about your questions and challenges and hear from other folks about what the fundraising cycle is like for them.
Thank you so much, Krystyn. I just really loved that framing and how you sort of broke out this idea around the different cycle pieces and the multiple ways that you can use that cycle to evaluate the strength of your organization or the weaknesses, where you need to focus and where you need to spend your time. So I have a few questions written down, but I'm going to start with one that's in the Q&A section. So just a reminder to folks out there, please use the Q&A to note any questions that you have. And we'll start with one from Charlie. How do you balance showing funders how much impact their money will make their money will make without making it sound like you're entirely dependent on them for funding? So can you just clarify how we should go about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm just going to reframe it because I think there's two ways that I could interpret it. So I think the question is, you want to show a funder that their work is going to make it, their grant is going to make a difference, or their money is going to make a difference, without making it sound like you're so desperate that if they don't fund you, you can't do this work at all. So it's that balance of, you're going to make a difference, but we're not unsustainable or in jeopardy. I think that the storytelling and showing them how they're part of the community, with the caveat. So this is where that trust building stage is really important. There are going to be funders out there who want to own any project that they fund. They are actually going to want to be able to take credit for it. They're going to want to show that we gave this money, we were the sole or the lead funder, and our money made the difference. They wouldn't perceive that as being vulnerable or risky. They would perceive that as being you saying your dollars will make this difference, as being exactly what they're looking for. So for the funders that want to take credit, really build them into, here's how there's an alignment between your interests and ours. For the other funders, maybe you're writing letters of inquiry or you're writing to individual donors and you don't want to seem like we're going to fail without you. You're right. There's a fine line around what is urgent and important versus urgent and desperate and can be perceived as being weak. So that's where you talk about your community. That's where you talk about all of the other people who are involved in this, whether it's funders or volunteers or staff members or community members. Everyone is working hard. This is what we're working to achieve together. Here's how your support contributes to this team effort, or here's how you become a member of this community or become part of a group of people who are working together. The same way that if you were hiring for a position in your organization or recruiting someone to be on your sports team, you might say, we have an incredible team. We've got great hitting, we've got great defense. You're an amazing pitcher. You join our baseball team, and together we're going to win the league. Show them that same equivalent in terms of your organization and your program work. We have this strong element. We have this strong element. There's this really important goal that we're working towards. Here's how you fit into it. I think that's the way that you do that.
That's great. Thank you. And here's a great question from Kelly. She said, I've been constantly struggling with external succession issues. Example, rebuilding trust with people due to position changes, and wonder how to stay ahead of this better.
Yeah, that's been, especially the last couple of years, the COVID and economic factors and global factors have changed the face of a lot of organizations, both on the program side and on the funder side. So one, just acknowledge that that's real. I think one of the reasons I wanted to put that challenge slide in and really emphasize that time issue is because there aren't shortcuts to fundraising. So if it's really bad, if your organization is dependent on some very specific relationships with funders, I would just flag that as a potential risk or issue for your organization and try to get more people involved or paying attention to it. Otherwise, finding ways to be part of the community, finding ways to reach out to funders when you're not just asking for money. So sharing good news with them, complementing other projects or initiatives that they're funding that aren't yours, so that you've got reasons to continue that relationship with people or meet people and get to know them when you're not at that grant deadline time, when their inbox is probably already full.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it is important to know that that is very much an issue for the organizations as well as the funders. There's a lot of turnover with foundations as well right now. And so I think part of it is also reminding new relationships of the history that you may have had together, because you shouldn't take for granted that they know that whole history as well. So here's one from Amy. From your experience, what is the best advice or best action you can give for building trust with a potential funder?
It depends on the nature of the funder and the nature of the work that you do. So I'll give you a few examples, and then if there's a specific thing you want to address, feel free to pop it in the question. So for a funder who is it's really important to them that you have credibility or scientific credibility, and that, say, you're working in environmental science or conservation. One of the things that is important when I was talking about it's not just your fundraising department that builds credibility, is you're going to be looking at having people quoted in the media. You're going to be looking at maybe having papers running in journals that they read, attending conferences, speaking at conferences, these types of things where you're establishing your credibility as a scientist or an expert in the field, and then making sure that after those things happen, the funder gets told about them. So you're emailing the article to them so that they see it, or going up to them at the conference and talking to them to just make the connection between your work and the expert who is speaking. If it is a personal relationship, it may be that someone's on board with the cause, but they don't know you very well. Being seen without, you don't want to follow them from place to place, but where do they get their information from? So this is more of a communications or marketing approach where you say, well, are they a member of the environmental funders network? And do they get information through that network? Do you want peers to vouch for you or talk about the importance of your program? Is there a collective funding impact model that might be appropriate? Do they go to conferences? Do you have friends or colleagues in common? Does your board have friends or colleagues in common with them? So just looking at what messengers would be the most influential to let them know that you're an organization or you're a program that has an impact that they could pay attention to. So those are kind of the two for the more traditional funder. And then if you're looking at a corporate sponsor or something that's more on the public facing side of things, almost always it's going to be your reach. So they maybe don't care as much if they like you personally. They maybe aren't as into the science or the specifics. For some funders, it's going to be how many people are following you on social media. What's your social media influence look like? What's the size of your mailing list? How many people are looking at your websites? And it's going to be a straight up calculation. If I give your organization these sponsorship dollars, will you get my company's logo in front of this target audience for less money than it would cost me to do online advertising or get a billboard or some other advertising strategy? So if that's the approach that you're taking, think about yourself like an advertising model. and put the numbers together to show that you can reach their audience more effectively than other channels.
Yeah, and I heard someone who was a specialist on corporate sponsorship talk about you need to know your audience as well. Like, it's not enough to just say our list is this big, but if you can say our list is this type of folks, or this, the more you can show that you have an intimate understanding of your own donor base or membership list or whatever, then the more likely it is that they can see if their company aligns with what it is that the type of people that you reach. So it was a sort of a different framing of how to develop a corporate package than one that I'd used before. Here's a question on the topic of building trust. What do you do if the funder says by invitation only? How can you build trust in those kinds of situations?
So if the funder says by invitation only, then obviously you're only ever going to get a chance to pitch them if they invite you to pitch them. So that's one of those areas where a relationship is going to take longer to establish. It's not always guaranteed. Not everyone's going to like you. You're not going to like every funder you meet. There may not be a fit or a match. But in theory, if there's a theoretical good match there, then you need to find out where they get their information from. So again, are they the type of funder that goes to a lot of conferences? Are they the type of funder that's listening to what other funders are doing and learning from them? Do they have their own internal PR department that's looking for the organizations that have a particular online position? Are they closely affiliated with government cycles? And so there's a connection to the policy community. That will take some time to figure out, and you will need volunteers or board members or advisors, other people in your network usually to help you out. It's unlikely that you'll find that information on Google or find it out accidentally. And if it's not too competitive, if it's appropriate, one of the best ways is partnering with organizations that are getting support. So if you feel like you have an extra piece of a puzzle that you could add to something that the funder is already supporting, you can talk about a partnership with an organization that is getting funding, and then that will eventually put you on the funder's radar screen, maybe leading to a more direct relationship in the future. But it's a lot easier if you had just using the oceans example again, if you had a community awareness campaign that you were planning around Ocean Week Canada, it's a lot easier to get funding attached to something that other organizations are already doing than it is to get a funder that's never heard of you before to fund your project. So partnerships might be the best path.
That's great. Well, here's a couple questions coming in on the chat. How do small grassroots organizations with very limited staff be more visible to attract funding to run their programs? And then there's a secondary question. I don't know if you want to do it at the same time, but it's about how do grassroots leaders get invited to conferences for the exposure they need, or where do they look for such events?
Those are excellent questions, both practically and philosophically. So I'm really passionate about this because there are issues, right? Like, I don't think that the organizations that get the most money should be the organizations who know the most funders or know the most rich people. I think the organizations that get the most money should be the ones that have the programs that are making the biggest difference. That isn't always 100% the case. So if you are a grassroots leader and you feel like your issue isn't getting any attention, finding one of two things. Either, is it an issue that the media needs to cover? Because once the media decides something's an issue, there will be more interest from funders and from the policy community because it's putting it on their radar screen. If you have the type of issue that's not necessarily going to be worthy of media attention, that might not be the right fit. Then you want to look at who's in your community, who's part of that decision-making network or that activist or philanthropic network, and how do you establish relationships with those people? And it may not be that you get directly to the funder instantly. It may be that you get invited to the party before you meet the host. It might be the case. If you are actually feeling like you're not getting invited to places that your organization or its work belongs, reach out to the organizers. Like most conferences these days within our community do have some space available or can make some concessions for people who don't have the financial ability to pay for themselves. Either the organization's small or new, or the folks who want to attend are younger, young professionals. There's usually a way to get into an event if you're just starting out, in order to establish those relationships. You may not get on the stage as a speaker instantly, but definitely you can fit one more person in the room most of the time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The other thing I get a lot of at my foundation is I get introductions about potential projects from other foundations. So if you have one funder who really likes what you're doing, you can maybe connect with them, especially after you've built trust and work with them a few times. You can sometimes work with them to sort of share your information to other potential funders. I've definitely had that happen quite a few times, and I've also done that with organizations that I really support as well. Here's another question around the fact that, you talked about the sort of numbers game and how hard it can be to figure out how much you need to have in the pipe to make sure that funds are coming out. How do you not get discouraged? How do you keep the momentum going when you're a small organization, you're really struggling to kind of keep the cycle going, and it feels like with all the turnover and all the no's, like, just what can you say to help encourage people out there?
Yeah, that struggle is very real. And if you're finding it discouraging, you are in good company. So first, just acknowledge it's not all in your head. And if you get stuck in that, if I just work harder, if I just put in a few more hours, or if I just add this one more thing, it doesn't always solve the problem. So acknowledging that the struggle is real. And then how do I personally, like, it feels really good when you get to work on a great project. So it's harder in the beginning, but then you're a little more innocent in the beginning. But just knowing what it feels like to actually get to work on a good project, that rush and warm feeling can carry you for years in some ways. So that's I think that's personally what would be the most influential, but flagging that if it's sinking, like if you really are either getting more no's or there just aren't enough funders that are particularly interested in the type of work you're doing, maybe the solution isn't to just double down on the same strategy. Maybe the solution is actually to come up with a different strategy, either look at different funding models for your organization, change the scope or the scale of what you're trying to do so that it fits with what funders have the capacity to support, change the timeline that you're working on. If you've hit a real wall, don't be afraid to adjust and scale back. Don't feel like you have to do it exactly the way everyone else is doing it, because it might not actually be the perfect fit for your particular program.
And you spoke earlier about if you're getting a lot of no's, there might be something that you need to do to make it more compelling. So how do we do that? How do we make our organizational projects more compelling? What are some ways to tackle that?
Yeah, you're looking for feedback. So either directly asking a funder, hey, can you give me any feedback? What are the reasons? What might we have done differently or presented differently? If you're talking to people in person, then you're using all of those human cues, like when are they interested and engaged? When are they looking in a different direction? What did they actually say in the meeting? It might just be that you were not interesting in the conversation and the material is fine, but you need to work on how you present the material. It may be that your qualifying was off and you've just been pitching to people that there isn't actually a great alignment between your work. And so you could have done the most amazing pitch in the whole world, but you were talking to the wrong funder. So look for specific pieces of information, either things they tell you, cues they're giving, data they're giving, that will give you a sense about what was it that didn't land or didn't track. And in particular, if it's the same pattern over and over and over again, that's a good sign that it's something you're doing. Sometimes it's just not the right funder and there's nothing you could do differently. And then you just forget about it and move on.
Yeah, and I think also getting help from someone from the outside who's not sort of stuck into your organization and knows all the lingo have an objective perspective on what you're saying and making sure that it makes sense, or are you using too much jargon, or is the pitch clear? I think that can also be really helpful to folks as well. Sam always says she gets her, I think she says she gets her mom to read over the letters that she writes, the donor letters, so that she can see, is it going to hit the audience. How long, if you don't hear from a funder, do you wait, or is it sort of like write it off and move back to step one? You sort of talked about when you get no's or when you don't hear anything at all. And is that common?
Yeah. Yes, it's common. That trust building and prospecting, that research stage, you should have a sense of what their time frame for decision making is going to be like. So a foundation might say, here's the date at which decisions are made. I wouldn't pester them before that date, but absolutely put that on your calendar. And if you don't hear from them, reach out and ask them. I saw instances just this year of organizations that were awarded funding and didn't see the emails and almost missed it because they missed the email from the funder. So if they've given a date or a time frame for decision making, put that on your calendar and follow up. If it's extremely open-ended and like you're talking to a funder about a potential sponsorship or something, and there's no formal decision-making process, if it's possible, if you've got the relationship with them, ask them, how much time do you think you need to review this internally, and then put that on your calendar and follow up. And if you don't, then you can specify a time frame when you're giving them a pitch or an ask, saying, I'd really love to hear from you either with a decision or just if you're interested one way or the other by this date. And if they don't get back to you by that date, you follow up. And if you've followed up, so say you say, I'm going to give you 2 weeks to look over this sponsorship pitch. Just let me know if you're interested or not. 2 weeks goes by, you don't hear from them. Hey, just following up with my message. Is this something you're interested in? Would love to know. And then, the next couple days goes by, you still don't hear from them. One more follow-up. And then you can, politely say, if you change your mind or if this sparks interest in the future, you know where to reach me. Love to work with you, and then move on. So if they don't give you a time frame, I would say make your own time frames so that you're not spinning your wheels.
Yeah, for sure, without being too pushy, but yes,
yeah,
for sure. I wondered if for a minute, Krystyn, before we end, you could talk a little bit about your Entremission and what can people potentially reach you about, and what kinds of services do you provide?
Sure. So the organizer is the weekly newsletter that we do that's free. And like I said, we cycle through the 6 major topics of organizational life. So that is available on our website. We also do a mix of coaching and technology projects, actually building apps and websites and things like that, as well as impact measurement. So spending a lot of time helping organizations develop impact measures and figure out how to tell their impact story. And we do have a promotion going on right now, thanks to one of the federal government support programs. So we do 1-hour coaching sessions that you can book through our website. And there's a big discount if you book through our website. So if you wanted one-on-one, we call it micro coaching, ad hoc coaching, just book a time and we can talk about a particular issue or topic, brainstorm something, answer a question, figure it out together. And there's no commitment required. You could just do it whenever you want, maybe once every couple of months. It's just nice to know that there's some support available when you need it at the last minute.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the framing you brought to funding today in the conversation, and also the opportunity for folks to reach out if there's further information. So thanks again, Krystyn. And with that, we are just up to 5 p.m. And I like to end on time. So thank you everyone for joining us. Don't forget, you can check out our YouTube channel for past sessions of our various presenters. Sam Laprade will be back next month, and we'll be talking about governance and board development, and we'll be linking the idea of fundraising to working with your board. So thanks everybody. We'll see you on July 10th, and take care.
Take care, everyone.